The clinic phone wouldn't stop ringing. Lucía had just finished reviewing her last case for the day, scribbling notes with steady, experienced hands on a restless golden retriever suffering from separation anxiety. At 45, her face carried the Aguirre, quiet weight of years spent saving lives and losing them too. Every crease was a memory, every silence a scar. Refugio Noble, Dr. Lucía Hernandez speaking, she answered, her voice calm but alert. A man's voice came through, smooth, polished, northern Mexico City accent. Good afternoon, doctor. My name is Roberto Aguirre. I was referred to you for your work with canine behavior. We need your help with our German Shepherd. He's acting oddly. Lucía narrowed her eyes. 15 years in animal behavior had sharpened her ear for what wasn't being said. This man didn't sound like a worried pet owner. He sounded cautious. What kind of behavior are you seeing, Mr. Aguirre? She asked, flipping to a fresh page in her nearly full schedule. Well, barking nonstop, not eating right, looks tense all the time. He paused, his voice faltering just a beat. My wife's very concerned. Max is very important to us. That pause, that strange, almost scripted phrasing. Lucía had dealt with plenty of elite families from Polanco and Las Lomas. Over the years, she'd learned that their pets often mirrored what they themselves refused to speak aloud. How long has this been going on? She asked. Roughly 3 weeks, the man replied. Has anything changed at home recently? Renovations? New family members? A move? Silence stretched across the line. No, nothing significant. Can you come tomorrow afternoon? We'll compensate you as needed. It's urgent. Lucía's instincts pricked like thorns beneath the skin. Dogs didn't fall apart without a reason. They reflected the chaos around them. Violence, grief, secrets. All right, Mr. Aguirre. I'll need your address and Max's details. Paseo de las Palmas 247, Lomas de Chapultepec. Max is a 3-year-old German Shepherd, about 35 kilos. We adopted him last year. Lucía wrote down the address with a slow breath. That neighborhood was fortress-like, home to CEOs, politicians, people who paid top dollar to keep their lives private. I'll be there at 4 tomorrow. Anything else I should know about Max? Or the environment he's in? Another pause. Measured breathing. No, doctor. Just that Max means a great deal to us. We want him well. Lucía hung up and stared at her notes long after the call ended. Something about the way Aguirre said special unsettled her. It was too heavy. Too deliberate. That night she brewed her usual chamomile tea and sat before a photo of Isabella, her daughter. The baby had only lived 8 months, but her short life had reshaped Lucía's own forever. Tomorrow I meet Max, mi amor, she whispered to the frame, and I've got a feeling he's going to need us. The next day, Lucía drove the ring road toward Las Lomas. As the city blurred past her windows, the skyline shifted from dense apartment blocks to massive walled estates. The air felt heavier here, thick with the weight of power and silence. The Aguirre residence stunned her the moment she arrived. A towering iron gate, at least 4 meters high, bristled with cameras and sensors. It didn't look like a house. It looked like a consulate. From the street, the manicured grounds flaunted perfect symmetry, trimmed palms, fountains of bougainvillea, stone paths laid with mathematical precision. Before she could buzz in, a voice crackled through the intercom. Dr. Hernandez? Yes, I have an appointment with Mr. Aguirre. The gate buzzed open. Lucía eased her car onto the cobbled driveway winding toward a massive pink stone mansion. A blend of colonial architecture and modern touches whispered of wealth so old it didn't need to shout. Waiting at the entrance was Roberto Aguirre himself, tall, silver-haired, about 60. He wore an ash-gray cashmere sweater that probably cost more than most families made in a month. His handshake was brief, his palm damp despite the crisp October breeze. "Dr. Hernandez, thank you for coming on such short notice," he said. "My pleasure, Mr. Aguirre. Is Max nearby?" "In the back garden with my wife Carmen." "Come, I'll introduce you." They passed through a marble foyer adorned with abstract Mexican art and sterile designer furniture. It was beautiful, but hollow. The space felt curated, not lived in. In the back garden, half a hectare of green perfection, they found Carmen seated beneath an ancient ash tree, holding a cold cup of coffee in trembling hands. She looked mid-50s, beautiful once, but now ghosted by sorrow. Her expression barely changed as they approached. "Darling, this is Dr. Hernandez," Roberto said gently, too gently, like rehearsed kindness. Carmen looked up, forced to smile. "Doctor, thank you for coming. Max is very disturbed lately." Then Lucía saw him. Max, a magnificent German shepherd, muscular, sleek, gleaming coat of black and tan. He moved like a trained sentinel, but his eyes, those eyes, burned with unease. Lucía had seen that look before. It wasn't anxiety. It wasn't trauma. It was warning. Something was deeply, horribly wrong in that house. And Max knew it. His stance screamed discipline, the kind that comes from serious training. But his eyes, those restless, intense eyes, triggered every instinct Lucía had honed in her years as a behavioral specialist. The dog stood rigid near a side entrance of the house, one of those rarely used doors that hinted at a lower level of the property. Max paced in tight circles, ears twitching, tail rigid and low. Every few steps he paused, took deep, deliberate sniffs of the cold air near the base of the door, then scratched frantically at the floor like something urgent lay just beyond it. "How long has he been acting like this?" Lucía asked, inching closer, keeping her tone calm. "About 3 weeks now," Roberto answered quickly, but Lucía caught a flicker of something on Carmen's face, a subtle lift of the brow that didn't match his words. "Have you ever opened that door to see what's got him so worked up?" The silence that followed was thick, tangible, almost. Roberto and Carmen exchanged a glance that was too fast to be casual but too tense to be meaningless. "That door stays locked, Doctor," Roberto finally muttered. "It's just storage. Nothing that should interest Max." Lucía knelt near the dog, speaking in a soft, grounding voice. Max stared at her, pleading with eyes that felt almost human. When she offered her hand, he nudged it aside and moved straight to the door, clearly wanting her to follow. "That's odd," Lucía murmured. "This isn't generalized anxiety. He's responding to a very specific trigger. He's not nervous. He's trying to warn us." The Aguirre couple stayed quiet, frozen in place as Lucía watched Max resume his pattern. Circle, sniff, scratch, then stare at her like he was begging to be understood. That's when it hit her. This house wasn't just hiding things behind its thick Cantera walls and stained glass windows. The secrets here were part of the very foundation, buried deeper than brick or stone. And Max, with every nerve still, fine-tuned from a past life of service, had picked up on something his human companions either couldn't see or chose not to. Lucía returned twice a week during the first stage of Max's behavioral therapy, and each visit peeled back another layer. This wasn't normal stress behavior. Max's responses aligned disturbingly well with dogs trained to detect medical episodes or imminent danger. He was a therapy dog before he came here, Esperanza the gardener had said casually on Lucía's third visit. The middle-aged woman had been trimming the rose bushes when she wandered over, speaking in the low, easy confidence that people share when they know you care about the same vulnerable lives. "A therapy dog?" Lucía repeated, pretending to stay focused on her notes, though her eyes kept drifting to Max, who was once again circling the locked basement door. "Do you know what kind of therapy?" Esperanza glanced nervously toward the house before leaning closer. Well, I've been here 5 years, and when Max arrived, he had all his certifications and papers. Senor Roberto told me to stash them in the tool shed, said they weren't needed anymore. That little detail lit up every mental alert Lucía had. Therapy dogs don't just lose their instincts. In fact, those abilities sharpen with time. If Max had been trained to sense seizures, panic attacks, or autism episodes, then his fixation on the basement wasn't just curiosity. It was purpose. Do you remember what the certificate said? Lucía asked, careful not to alarm. Something about special children, I think. Kids who need extra help, you know? That evening, as Max resumed his obsessive dance, Lucía paid closer attention. His behavior wasn't random. It followed a schedule. Between 3 and 5 p.m., his anxiety ramped up like clockwork. His ears twitched constantly, like he was picking up sounds that human ears missed. Roberto appeared on the patio with a tray of coffee, his smile warm but tight around the jaw, another red flag for Lucía, who had learned to read micro-expressions as easily as a lie detector. "How's the progress, doctor? Anything we can do to help Max?" Lucía kept her tone even. "Actually, I've been thinking about Max's past. Could you tell me exactly how he came into your care?" The question triggered a flicker of hesitation, brief but unmistakable. "We adopted him through someone in Guadalajara," Roberto replied. "A family who couldn't care for him anymore." His eyes avoided hers as he spoke. "Why do you ask?" "Well," Lucía said slowly, "his behavior points to very specific training. Therapy dogs often form deep emotional connections with the people they're meant to help. If Max is searching for someone, or reacting to a memory, we might be able to use that to help redirect his behavior." Carmen appeared on the upper terrace, watching the conversation unfold with a look Lucía couldn't quite place. She wore a wool sweater despite the mild October afternoon, and her hands trembled, just slightly but consistently, as they had during every visit. "Carmen, could you come down for a moment?" Roberto called up. "The doctor has some questions about Max." As Carmen descended the stone steps, Max abruptly abandoned the basement door and moved toward her. He didn't seek affection or attention. Instead, he stood firmly between Carmen and the front door, body low and still, tail tense. Lucía recognized the stance immediately. Protective alertness. "Carmen, does Max always act like this around you?" she asked gently, eyes scanning every nuance. "What do you mean, doctor?" Carmen replied. "He's just always been sweet to me. He's positioning himself like he's shielding you. That's common in dogs trained to assist people with medical or emotional vulnerabilities." Carmen's face blanched. She looked to her husband, panic bleeding through every line of her face. Her hands now shook more openly, and she struggled to meet Lucía's eyes. "I don't know, doctor. Max has always been affectionate, that's all." "Are you currently taking any medications, Mrs. Aguirre?" Lucía asked softly. Therapy dogs often respond to chemical changes in the people they care for. The silence that followed was deafening. Roberto cleared his throat, stepping forward and placing a firm, possessive hand on his wife's shoulder. "My wife is under treatment for stress, doctor. Nothing serious. Max is just very sensitive to those things." Lucía nodded slowly, feigning agreement, but her mind was already sprinting. Dogs like Max don't just react to medication. They respond to danger, crisis, truths buried beneath surface-level lies. And whatever he was sensing in this house wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Max wasn't reacting to noise or boredom. He was responding to something deeper, something that set off every protective instinct he had. "Would you mind letting me see inside the house?" Lucía asked calmly. Sometimes indoor spaces carry stress triggers that affect dogs. Her request caused a tense silence between the couple. Roberto's polite smile didn't falter, but Lucía noticed his knuckles turn white as he gripped the armrest of his chair. "Of course, doctor," he said with a forced chuckle. "Though I should warn you, some areas are under renovation and currently off limits." As they walked through the lower level of the mansion, Lucía picked up on subtle details she had somehow missed during earlier visits. The south-facing windows were sealed off with thick blackout curtains, shutting out all natural light. The marble floors echoed with an eerie resonance like there were hollow chambers beneath the surface. Max padded beside them, silent at first, but as they neared a certain part of the house, near the back door Lucía had seen from the garden, his entire demeanor shifted. The German shepherd began panting heavily. His ears stood straight, and he let out a series of barely audible whimpers that froze Lucía in place. "You hear that?" she asked quietly. "What, doctor?" Roberto replied, his voice suddenly brittle. "Max is vocalizing in a very specific way. It's something trained. Dogs do when they sense an impending crisis, like a medical alert." At that exact moment, a dull thump echoed from below their feet. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. Something had fallen or shifted in the basement. Max instantly bolted toward the door he had fixated on for days. "What was that?" Lucía demanded, her tone sharp. "Old pipes," Roberto replied too quickly. "This house makes strange sounds sometimes, especially the lower level." But Lucía had heard something different. That wasn't the clang of old plumbing or the creak of beams. It sounded like something heavy dropped onto bare concrete. And Max's reaction, instant, focused, intense, wasn't the response of a curious pet. It was the precise behavior of a trained alert dog, signaling he had found someone. That night back in her apartment, Lucía couldn't shake the feeling. She opened her laptop and began digging through public records tied to the Aguirre family. The information was sparse, but revealing. Roberto Aguirre was, in fact, the head of a powerful construction firm with government contracts and major infrastructure projects under his belt. Carmen, his wife, had once been a special education teacher. That detail aligned perfectly with owning a dog trained to assist children with developmental challenges. But one discovery kept Lucía awake. Long past midnight, official records showed the couple had a 16-year-old daughter named Daniela. Yet in all her visits to the house, Lucía had seen no trace of a teenager. No updated family photos. No bedroom or personal belongings. No signs that someone her age lived there. As she stared at a framed photo of Isabella on her desk, the little girl Max had originally been assigned to, Lucía's stomach turned. Something terrible was being hidden inside that mansion. Max wasn't just a nervous dog. He was frantic, desperate, acting out the very purpose for which he'd been trained. And that purpose, clearly, had to do with a young girl who should be in that house but who had seemingly vanished from existence. Where was Daniela Aguirre? The second week of October brought endless rain that soaked the gardens of the Aguirre estate until they resembled a scene from a melancholy painting. Lucía arrived for her scheduled session and found Max in a state of agitation unlike anything she'd seen before. He was racing across the lawn, drenched to the bone, yet always circling back to one spot, the barred window that led to the basement, half hidden behind overgrown hedges. "Max, here!" Roberto shouted from under the covered terrace. But the dog didn't even flinch. It was the first time Lucía had seen him outright ignore a command. "Good morning, Mr. Aguirre," she said as she hurried to the porch, dodging the heavy downpour. "Have you noticed any recent changes that might explain this behavior?" Roberto came down the steps with an umbrella, his face a blend of frustration and something else, something closer to fear. "To be honest, doctor, we're at our wits' end," he admitted. Last night Max barked straight through until 3 a.m. The neighbors are threatening to complain, and frankly, we just need this resolved. The desperation in his voice made Lucia's chest tighten. She knew that tone. She'd heard it from people about to give up on their animals. People who saw dogs as problems to fix, not as beings trying to say something. Mr. Aguirre, she began carefully, have you considered that Max might be sensing something specific? His therapy training may be responding to a stimulus, something triggering his protective instincts. What exactly are you implying, Doctor? Roberto asked, his voice low but tight. Lucia took a small step forward. It was time to press. Gently but clearly, dogs trained for special needs children form incredibly strong bonds. If Max was paired with a child, perhaps one with autism, his current behavior suggests he's detecting that child's distress. It's not general anxiety, he's trying to alert someone. Roberto didn't move. The umbrella trembled slightly in his grip. For several long seconds, the only sound was the rain drumming on the canopy of old ash trees. I don't know what you're talking about, he finally said. Max is just our family dog. But Lucia noticed the subtle shift. Our dog, not my dog or my wife's. She had learned over years of experience that people concealing something always leaned into vague pronouns when the truth got too close. Just then, Carmen appeared at the front door in a bathrobe, her hair damp and her eyes glassy. It was already 11 a.m., but she looked like she had just crawled out of bed. Her movements were sluggish, disoriented, but her eyes had that jittery alertness of someone who hadn't slept. Roberto, you still can't get Max to settle? She asked with a shaky voice. Carmen, Roberto said quickly, Dr. Hernandez is here for the session. Why don't you change and join us? I can't. I don't feel well today. My meds are making me dizzy, Lucia observed carefully. Carmen wasn't just medicated, she was over-medicated. Her dilated pupils, her clumsy coordination, the slurred tail of her words, it all pointed to high-dose benzodiazepines way beyond therapeutic levels. Mrs. Aguirre, Lucia said softly, may I ask what medication you're currently taking? Certain drugs can trigger behavioral changes in therapy animals, and this could help me better understand Max's behavior. Carmen looked at her husband. The silence that followed was more revealing than any answer. A wave of sheer panic washed over her face, her hands now visibly trembling, and Lucia noticed how Carmen gripped the doorframe like it was the only thing keeping her upright. I take meds for the anxiety and to sleep. The doctor says I don't think she needs all those details, Carmen. Roberto cut in sharply, stepping closer and placing a firm hand on her arm. Less a gesture of comfort, more one of subtle control. That's when Max abruptly stopped circling and moved toward Carmen, standing between her and Roberto. His body stiffened, posture tense and protective, but this time there was a flash of something almost feral in his stance. Huh, Lucia muttered, jotting a note. Max is displaying very specific protective behaviors. That's often seen in dogs trained to assist people experiencing severe emotional distress or panic attacks. What exactly are you implying, Doctor? Roberto's voice dropped in. Temperature. I'm not implying anything, Mr. Aguirre, she answered evenly. Just observing. Max is clearly reacting to signals the rest of us can't perceive. Therapy dogs respond to changes in heart rate, scent, micro-expressions. If Max was trained for a particular person, he might be struggling to reassign that role. Tears slipped silently down Carmen's cheeks, mingling with the wind-driven rain as it swept across the porch. Max instinctively stepped closer, not looking for affection, but positioning himself with precision, eyes tracking Carmen while remaining alert to everything around her. Senora Aguirre, does Max usually react like this when you're upset? Yes, always. He just knows. Since he arrived. Since the first day. And when was that exactly? Roberto interjected, irritation creeping into his tone. Doctor, I think we're losing focus here. What we need is for Max to stop barking and act like a normal pet. The phrase normal pet echoed in Lucia's mind like a warning bell. Roberto didn't want a working dog fulfilling his trained role. He wanted a docile animal that wouldn't raise questions or disrupt the image he curated. Mr. Aguirre, I understand your concerns, but trying to suppress Max's natural behavior without first understanding what's triggering it could be harmful in the long run. Would you mind showing me Max's original training documents? That would really help in creating a proper behavioral plan. Those papers got lost in the movie, Roberto replied instantly. But Lucia remembered clearly. Esperanza had once mentioned that some documents were kept in the tool shed. I see. And what about Max's previous handlers? Would it be possible to reach out to them? Their input could be vital in understanding his habits and any specialized routines. That won't be possible. It was a private adoption. We don't stay in touch. Every response from Roberto only deepened Lucia's doubts. Legitimate therapy dog placements usually involved monitored transitions, medical histories, and post-placement follow-ups. The total lack of contact with the previous owners felt deliberate, as if there were pieces of Max's past they didn't want traced. The rain intensified, and Carmen excused herself to head back inside. As she climbed the steps, Lucia watched Max follow her every movement until she was completely out of sight. Then he turned and resumed his silent vigil by the basement window. Mr. Aguirre, she said, would it be all right if we inspected the section of the yard where Max spends so much time? Dogs often detect subtle cues, sounds, smells that we miss. Pinpointing the source could help address his behavior. That area's under renovation, Roberto said quickly. There's a water leak down in the basement. It's not safe. But, as he spoke, Lucia's eyes wandered. The space beneath the window looked pristine. Grass neatly trimmed, bushes expertly shaped, and no tools or debris in sight. No sign of any real construction at all. Of course, I understand the safety concerns, she said carefully. How about we schedule a few extra sessions over the next 2 weeks? Max's behavior suggests something's escalating and early. Intervention might prevent it from worsening. Roberto agreed, though his shoulders were stiff with unease and his gaze refused to meet hers. Lucia could tell. This man was hiding something. Something buried deep within that household. And Max, with his instincts still razor-sharp and his training undimmed, had become an unwelcome threat. A danger to a secret that had stayed hidden too long. As she walked back to her car, Lucia heard Max barking again from inside the house. Not random barking, not restless or bored. These barks were patterned, deliberate. A sharp, urgent rhythm, as if he were trying to say something no one else dared acknowledge. Later that evening, back at her desk, Lucia made up her mind. She would dig deeper into the Aguirre family's past. And especially, she would find out what had happened to Daniela, the teenage daughter whose name was listed on the public records, yet who seemed to have vanished from the present reality of that grand house in the hills of Chapultepec. The start of November marked a turning point in Lucia's visits to the Aguirre estate. During her 7th session with Max, she arrived early and took a quiet walk around the property before ringing the front bell. What she saw unsettled her to the core. 3 different delivery vehicles arrived in just under 30 minutes. First, a catering truck from an upscale service usually reserved for large private events. Workers hauled in enough food to feed several families for days. Then came a van from a high-end private pharmacy, dropping off multiple bags likely filled with prescription medication. Finally, an unmarked SUV arrived, offloading boxes that clearly contained clothing and personal items. Morning, doctor. Esperanza greeted her as Lucía finally walked through the gate. The gardener was watering flowers near the entrance, but her face carried a strain Lucía hadn't noticed before. Good morning, Esperanza. Everything all right here? The woman cast a wary glance toward the house, then slowly stepped closer. Her voice dropped. Doctor, may I ask you something? Is he getting better? Well, he's still showing the same. Why didn't he bark last night? That was the first question that made Lucia's stomach twist. Max always barked, without fail, every single night for the past year, between 10 and midnight, like clockwork. The sudden shift in his behavior made her stop, in her tracks. Therapy dogs trained to care for individuals with autism or developmental disorders often built strict nighttime routines, especially when their person struggled with sleep or experienced evening anxiety. And last night had been different. Yes, doctor, very different, Esperanza nodded. And early this morning I saw them bringing in supplies, boxes of food, medications, like they were preparing for something. Having worked in the homes of wealthy families for years, Esperanza knew the signs. When people stocked up like that, it usually meant they were getting ready for long stretches of isolation, or making sure no one from the outside came snooping around. Esperanza, have you ever seen the Aguirre's daughter? Daniela, I think her name is? The question hit the gardener like a slap. Her hands froze mid-prune and sorrow washed over her face. Doctor, you know about the girl? Lucía furrowed her brow. What girl, Esperanza? The older woman's voice dropped to a whisper. The one in the basement, the one Max watches over. Her words dropped like stones into a still pond, and the ripples shook Lucía to her core. For weeks, she'd had the sense something was off in that house. But to hear it spoken so plainly by someone inside, it was horrifying and affirming. Can you tell me more? Esperanza cast a nervous glance back at the house, then gently tugged Lucía by the arm toward a thick grove of ash trees that shielded them from view. Doctor, I shouldn't be saying any of this, but that girl needs help. Her name is Daniela. She's 16 and she's been living down there in the basement for over 2 years. Why would they keep her there? Lucía asked, heart pounding. Because Mr. Roberto says she's sick. Says her mind isn't right, that she's dangerous, but I've seen her, doctor. She's not dangerous. She's a sweet girl, smart, just different. Like my nephew. He has what they call autism. Lucia's worst fears were taking shape. If Daniela Aguirre was being kept in that basement against her will, this wasn't just child neglect. It could be unlawful imprisonment. Does Max interact with her? Yes, doctor. He's the only one allowed down there. Roberto says it's to keep her calm, but I think it's the other way around. She's the one keeping Max calm. Just then, Roberto Aguirre appeared on the terrace in a sharp black suit, clearly on his way to a meeting. Dr. Hernandez, sorry to keep you waiting. Shall we begin? Esperanza instantly turned away, diving back into her gardening like nothing had happened. Of course, Mr. Aguirre. Where's Max this morning? Inside, he replied. He's been unusually quiet since last night, which we hope is a good sign. As they walked toward the house, Lucía tried to process everything she'd just learned. If Max had been quiet, perhaps it meant he had been with Daniela, performing his duties as a therapy dog. Those nighttime barks Esperanza mentioned, maybe they weren't random at all. Maybe they were his way of telling the world someone in that house was in distress. Inside, Max was curled up by the basement door. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked at peace. But as soon as he spotted Lucía, he stood and trotted over, alert and focused. That's interesting, Lucía muttered. It's like Max found closure somehow, like something changed. Not that I'm aware of, Roberto replied, though he avoided glancing at the basement door. "And where's Mrs. Aguirre today?" Lucía asked. "Carmen's resting. Her meds have her pretty sedated these days." That word, sedated, rang alarm bells in Lucia's mind. Carmen wasn't being treated for anxiety. She was being drugged into compliance. Kept foggy and quiet so she wouldn't question what was going on beneath her own home. Max approached Lucía again, but this time, he did something entirely unexpected. He gently took the edge of her white coat between his teeth and tugged, softly, but deliberately, toward the basement door. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't anxious. It was purposeful. "What's Max doing?" Roberto asked, his voice tight with unease. "He's showing me something," Lucía said calmly. "Therapy dogs often alert or guide when they sense someone's in need." "Doctor, I think Max is just confused. Maybe we should do the session in the garden like usual." But Max wasn't confused. He kept tugging, alternating between Lucia's coat and eyeing the door with unwavering urgency. She'd worked with enough dogs to know this wasn't aimless behavior. It was intentional. "Mr. Aguirre, would it be possible for me to see the basement? As a professional, I believe Max is responding to a very specific stimulus from his previous training." "That won't be possible," Roberto said quickly. "The basement's under repair, as I told you before." At that moment, a sound echoed from below. Not construction noise, not pipes. It was the unmistakable sound of footsteps on concrete. Max sprang up, barking once sharply, and scratched at the door with desperation. "Is someone working down there today?" Lucía asked, eyes locked on his. Roberto hesitated, then forced a measured reply. "Yes. Yes, we have workers doing repairs." But Lucía had caught a crucial detail. The footsteps had stopped the moment Max barked, as if someone down there had heard and decided to stay perfectly still. "Mr. Aguirre," Lucía said, her tone low but firm, "I think we need to have a frank conversation about Max. His behavior suggests he's actively fulfilling a duty in this home, something aligned with his professional training. Ignoring that could not only harm his well-being but may lead to far more serious consequences." The implied warning was not lost on Roberto. For the first time since they'd met, the polished charm of a man used to being in control cracked ever so slightly. "Dr. Hernandez, I hope you understand. Our family takes its privacy very seriously. There are parts of our personal life that aren't up for discussion, no matter how strange our dog's behavior may seem." "Of course, Mr. Aguirre. But as a licensed veterinarian, I have ethical obligations I can't ignore." The message was clear. Both sides had spoken. Lucía now knew someone was in the basement who needed help, and Roberto knew she knew. The only question left was, what were they each going to do about it? That evening, as Lucía drove back to her clinic, she made a choice that would change everything. She was going to get into the Aguirre basement, with or without permission. Max, the German shepherd, had been trying to communicate something urgent for weeks, and now the message was finally clear. Somewhere in that mansion, a girl named Daniela was waiting, hoping someone would finally listen to what the dog had been trying to say all along. By the second week of November, fate opened the door she'd been waiting for. Roberto Aguirre called her early Tuesday morning, panic threading his voice, enough to spike every alarm bell Lucía had. "Dr. Hernandez, we need you today, right away. Carmen had a crisis last night. She's in the hospital. Max is totally out of control, and I've got a critical meeting I can't reschedule. Could you come by around 2 p.m.? It was the perfect setup. Lucía had spent days thinking of how to access the basement, and now both husband and wife would be gone at the same time. Her window had just opened. "Of course, Mr. Aguirre." "Will Mrs. Carmen be all right?" "Yes, just an accidental overdose of her anxiety meds. They're keeping her for observation, 24 hours. Lucía let the phrase accidental overdose sink in. The implications were chilling. Carmen hadn't just had an episode. She'd been drugged enough to be removed from the house, probably on purpose, and at a very specific time. That afternoon, Lucía pulled up to the Aguirre residence with a backpack that didn't just contain vet supplies. Inside were tools, a high-powered flashlight, a charged phone with video, and emergency medical equipment in case she found someone in serious distress. Esperanza met her at the gate. Her usual calm was gone, replaced by a nervous energy Lucía had never seen before. "Thank you for coming, Doctor. Max has been a mess since they took Mrs. Carmen." "Where's Mr. Aguirre?" "He left an hour ago for his meeting. Said he'd be back around 5. 3 hours." Lucía had 3 hours to uncover whatever was hidden beneath that house. "Esperanza, I need to ask you something important. Do you know how to get into the basement?" The gardener looked at her, fear flickering. Behind her eyes, then something stronger, resolve. "Doctor, you're here to help Daniela, aren't you? I'm going to try, but I'll need your help." "There's a service entrance through the kitchen. Mr. Roberto keeps the main keys, but I know where he hides the spares." As they walked around the back of the house, Esperanza began to speak, words that made Lucia's gut twist with dread and steel her resolve. "Daniela's different, but she's brilliant. She paints like a dream, and she knows all about plants and animals, but she gets overwhelmed, noises, people. Mr. Roberto says she's an embarrassment, that if people knew they had a daughter like her, they'd be laughed at." "How long has she been in the basement?" "Since she turned 14. Before that, she had a normal room. Then he decided it was safer this way for her, he says." They found Max in the backyard, but he wasn't acting like the anxious dog Lucía had treated before. No, today he was sharp, focused, like he was ready. "He knows you're going down there," Esperanza whispered, opening a small lockbox hidden behind a flower pot. "He always knows." The basement door was tucked into the service kitchen. Reinforced steel slab with multiple locks and a newly installed air vent. As Esperanza slipped the key into place, Lucía studied it. This wasn't just a storage room. Someone had gone to great lengths to conceal whatever lay behind that door. "Doctor, speak softly when you see her. Daniela doesn't like surprises, but Max, he'll help. He always does." The stairs led down into a room that felt trapped between two worlds. It wasn't a cell, but it wasn't a home either. Someone had tried to make it comfortable. Pale-colored walls, rugs, warm lights. But the comfort felt artificial, like wallpaper over concrete. Max descended first, leading Lucía to a corner where a glass partition formed a kind of inner chamber. That's where she saw her. Daniela. 16 years old, but her face carried an ageless grace that Lucía recognized instantly. The girl was autistic, there was no doubt, but her energy was radiant, intelligent. She sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by drawings, dozens of them, and they weren't just doodles, these were remarkable. Full of life, full of truth. When she saw Lucía, she didn't flinch, just tilted her head with cautious curiosity. Max moved beside her, positioning himself so he could see them both. "Hi, Daniela," Lucía said gently, approaching with care. "I'm Dr. Lucía. I take care of Max." Daniela looked at her directly, eyes steady. Then she pointed to the dog. "Max told me you were coming." Her voice was soft, the cadence unique. Autistic speech patterns Lucía had heard before, but her clarity was striking. "He said you're kind to animals, that you'd understand." "Max said that?" "He tells me a lot of things. When Dad's mad, when Mom's crying, when it's going to rain. And he told me you know I'm down here." Lucia's breath caught. It was confirmation of everything she'd feared and hoped. Daniela didn't just love Max. She had a connection with him and Max. He'd been trained for kids like her. This dog wasn't just a companion. He was her lifeline, her alarm system, her voice to the outside world. Daniela, do you know why you're living down here? She stopped drawing, looked up, and the sadness in her eyes wasn't confused, it was clear, deep. Dad says I'm different, that people wouldn't understand. He says this is the only way to keep me safe, that I don't need school or friends. But do you want those things, Daniela? Do you want to go to school? Have friends? She nodded slowly. Then she picked up one of her drawings and handed it to Lucía. It was a picture of Max standing between her and a locked door. The key? It was in Lucía's hand. The garden looked almost enchanted, but only through the eyes of someone peering out from behind iron bars. I started sketching everything I saw from that tiny grated window. Esperanza would sometimes visit and describe the new flowers she was planting. Max, always so gentle, would drop leaves and twigs at my feet so I could see their colors up close. That was when Lucía finally saw the full horror of what was happening. Daniela wasn't just hidden away, she was being denied any chance to grow, to learn, to connect with the world. For any teen, that would be devastating. But for someone with autism, whose potential blooms with the right support, it was pure isolation. Daniela, have you ever thought about living somewhere else? Lucía asked softly. A place where you could go to school, meet people who understand you. Tears welled up in Daniela's eyes. Not only sadness, but something else, hope. There's really a place like that? Where people won't think I'm weird. Yes, sweetheart, Lucía said, her voice warm. There are places filled with people just like you, who'd welcome you with open arms. Max moved in beside Daniela, sensing her emotions rise. He positioned himself so she could lean on him. It was clear this wasn't new. This routine between them had formed over months. Dr. Lucía, do you think you could help me get to one of those places? The question landed like a stone in Lucía's heart. It pulled something deep within her, the grief of losing her own daughter. Here stood a bright, beautiful soul with so much to give, trapped in a basement because her father was ashamed of her difference. I'll do everything I can, Lucía promised, but I need your help too. Can you tell me everything about your life down here? When you eat, when you sleep, do you ever leave this room? Over the next hour, Daniela laid out a daily rhythm that was both tender and heartbreaking. She had books, art supplies, and some games, but no human contact outside of immediate family and household staff. School had ended when she turned 14. Her only real glimpses of the outside came through Max and the garden stories from Esperanza. Does your mom come to visit? Lucía asked. Yes, Daniela replied, but she's been different lately. She brings candy and books, but forgets where she is. Sometimes she just stares. Max gets really anxious when she comes. He knows she's not well. It confirmed what Lucía had feared. Carmen was being drugged, heavily, probably to keep her from interfering. As they left the basement, Lucía carried more than confirmation. She carried Daniela's voice loud and clear, asking for a life outside those walls. Daniela wasn't unaware of her reality. She had the heart and mind to choose her path. Max followed Lucía upstairs but paused at the top, glancing back at the room as if making a silent vow to return. Esperanza, Lucía said once they were outside in the garden. I'm going to need your help with something important. We're going to get Daniela out, but it has to be done safely. For everyone, especially her. The gardener didn't hesitate. Her nod was firm, the kind that had waited years to be given purpose. Whatever you need, Doctora, That girl deserves a real life. That night, Lucía sat in her apartment, buried in stacks of legal codes, disability rights documents, and contact lists for social workers. For the first time since she met Max, she understood what he had been trying to show her all along. Now, the real question was, how do you rescue a girl locked away in silence without putting her or her allies in danger? Everything shifted in the days after that encounter. Lucía no longer saw this as a case about a dog's strange behavior. It was a full-blown rescue mission. It needed precision, strategy, and people who knew how to navigate legal landmines. All weekend, Lucía worked non-stop, building a network of professionals who might help. Her first call was to Elena Marquez, a disability rights attorney she'd met at a seminar on animal-assisted therapy the year before. "Elena, I need your guidance on something sensitive," Lucía said after the initial greetings. "There's a teenage girl with autism. Her family is keeping her locked in their home." There was silence on the other end. "You're sure?" Elena finally asked. "Completely," Lucía replied. "I've seen her. She's 16, trapped in a basement, no education. Her only real bond is with a therapy dog." Elena was quiet again, but this time with purpose. "Is the family powerful?" "Very. The father owns one of the largest construction firms in Mexico." "Then we need to move very carefully," Elena warned. "People with that kind of money have legal shields. We can't go in recklessly or we risk losing everything." She explained the situation involved multiple legal violations: unlawful imprisonment, educational neglect, medical abuse, especially if Carmen was being forcibly sedated. "Do you have proof?" Elena asked. "Photos, the room, and Daniela's testimony. She's lucid and aware of her circumstances." "That's a big deal. Courts often question whether someone with autism can give informed consent. If she can express her needs, it strengthens our case a lot." Next, Lucía called Dr. Patricia Solist, director of a nationally recognized autism center known for its innovative, integration-focused programs. "Patricia, I have someone who needs your center," Lucía began. "Go on," Patricia said. As Lucía explained Daniela's situation, Patricia's voice turned from clinical to passionate. "This is exactly the kind of case we're built for," she said. "We have residential programs for socially isolated teens. Daniela could thrive here. What would it take to admit her?" "A full psych evaluation," Lucía said. "Done," Patricia replied. "Just get her here. Basic medical documentation and clear proof that she can legally make decisions for herself. If she demonstrates mental competency, will be enough for us to move forward, even without her parents' approval." Monday morning, Lucía got a call she hadn't expected. "It's Dr. Hernandez," said Roberto Aguirre. "Carmen came home from the hospital last night and Max hasn't calmed down since. Could you come by this afternoon? It's urgent." There was a crackle of unease in his voice that told her something had shifted in that household. Lucía agreed, but this time she wasn't showing up empty-handed. She had a plan. Esperanza opened the front gate, her expression strained with worry. "Doctora, something's off. Señora Carmen came back really confused last night, and this morning, she's been asking for Daniela over and over again." "Does she remember seeing Daniela?" Lucía asked. Esperanza shook her head, unsure. "The meds are messing her up, but she keeps asking, 'Where's my daughter?' And Roberto, he doesn't know what to tell her." Inside, Carmen was seated in the main living room, still in a bathrobe despite the afternoon sun. Her gaze was distant, clouded with the dull glaze of someone heavily medicated, but every now and then something behind her eyes flickered, moments of sharp clarity that seemed to deeply unsettle Roberto. "Carmen, cariño, Dr. Hernandez is here to see Max," he said with forced calm. Carmen turned slowly to Lucía, her brow creasing in confusion. "Doctor, have you seen my daughter? Do you know Daniela?" The directness of the question dropped like a hammer into the room. Roberto immediately stepped in, his hand landing on Carmen's shoulder, not lovingly but like someone trying to reassert control. "Daniela's in Switzerland, remember? At the boarding school." "No," Carmen said firmly, surprising them all. "She's not in Switzerland. She's here. I hear her at night. Max watches over her." Roberto shot Lucía a look, part panic, part warning. "My wife's confused. The meds cause hallucinations sometimes." But Lucía had noticed something important. The instant Carmen said Daniela's name, Max had perked up, rushing toward the basement door with the same urgency he'd shown for weeks. "Señora Aguirre," Lucía said softly, "would you like to see Daniela?" "Yes," Carmen whispered. "Where is my daughter?" Roberto's demeanor changed instantly. His voice dropped into something darker, firmer. "Dr. Hernandez, I think you're upsetting my wife with dangerous ideas. Carmen needs peace, not this." "Señor Aguirre," Lucía replied, her tone steady. "As a medical professional, I can tell you, Carmen's showing clear signs of overmedication. Have her prescriptions been reviewed by her psychiatrist recently? My wife's prescriptions are none of your business." The conversation was now a confrontation. Lucía stayed calm but pressed forward. "During my visits, I've observed Max exhibiting very specific behaviors. He's responding as if he's acting as a therapy dog. He's engaged with someone in this house. And as a licensed veterinarian, I have an ethical obligation to act if I believe an animal is involved in the welfare of a vulnerable person." "What exactly are you suggesting, doctor?" Roberto snapped. "I'm not suggesting. I'm stating, Max is behaving like a working therapy dog, and the person he's attending to may be in need of immediate help." Carmen pushed herself up from the couch, unsteady but determined. "I want to see Daniela, now." "You need your medication," Roberto said, pulling a pill bottle from his pocket. "No, I don't want pills. I want to see my daughter." In that exact moment, Max made his choice. The dog stepped between Carmen and Roberto, his stance firm, his growl low and deliberate. "Max is guarding her," Lucía noted. "That's classic behavior for trained dogs when they sense their person is being pressured or threatened." "I think it's time for you to leave," Roberto said, stepping forward with intimidation clear in every movement. But Carmen had found something she hadn't had in months: clarity. "Roberto, I want her to see Daniela. I want someone else to know my daughter is here." "Carmen, you're sick. You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying. And I know you've been drugging my food so I wouldn't think clearly." The moment she said it, everything changed. Carmen's words shattered the veil Roberto had kept over this home. Lucía seized the opportunity. "Señora Aguirre, would you like me to personally check on Daniela? I can ensure she's receiving proper medical care." "Yes, please," Carmen said, her voice breaking. "My daughter needs help and I couldn't protect her." Roberto realized then, the illusion of control was gone. His wife wasn't docile anymore. She'd become a threat to every secret he'd buried in this house. "Fine," he said, at last, voice thick with reluctant menace. "But if you're going to see Daniela, it'll be on my terms. And Dr. Hernandez, I'd think carefully before getting involved in matters that don't concern you." People who do tend to regret it. The threat was clear, but so was Lucía's victory. She now had legitimate access to Daniela, with a witness, someone who could confirm the girl's condition. As they descended the stairs to the basement, Max trotted ahead, energized like never before. He knew. He knew he had finally gotten his message across. Daniela needed to be found, seen, and freed. This time, the descent wasn't secret. Lucía wasn't sneaking in. She was a licensed professional conducting an emergency check, even if the circumstances were suffocating. Carmen began to cry the moment she saw her daughter, not out of surprise but with the aching sorrow of a mother who'd been sedated into silence. "My sweet girl, Mama's here," Carmen whispered, reaching toward Daniela, with shaking hands. Daniela looked up from the notebook in her lap. Her smile was gentle, but there was pain in it. Deep, quiet heartbreak. "Hi, Mama. You look better today. Your eyes aren't as foggy as they were yesterday." That simple, heartbreaking observation made one thing clear. Daniela had been watching her mother, waiting for the day she'd come back to life. Carmen's mind, dulled for so long by over-medication, had begun to clear, and with it came a stark realization. Her daughter's powers of perception were far sharper than Roberto had ever wanted to admit. "Daniela," Lucía said gently, her voice threading through the tension in the room. "Your dad said I could speak with you about how you feel living here. Could you tell me what a normal day looks like for you?" Roberto stood rigid near the staircase, watching every word exchanged with a nervous energy that bordered on paranoia. His hands clenched and unclenched over and over, sweat running down his temples despite the cool air in the basement. Daniela nodded and began speaking, with a bluntness typical of many on the spectrum. "I usually wake up around 7. Max comes to check on me and lets me know if Dad's in a good mood or not. If he's mad, Max stays close to keep me calm." Lucía tilted her head. "How does Max know?" "He just does. He feels it," Daniela said. "If Dad's only stressed, Max walks in little circles. But if he's really angry, Max lies on top of me so I don't get scared when Dad yells." Carmen instinctively covered her mouth, shaken by her daughter's vivid picture of life at home. "Does your dad yell often?" Lucía asked, keeping her tone clinical, though mentally recording every word. "Mostly when he's on the phone. But sometimes about me too. He tells Mom I'm a disgrace. He says people would laugh at our family if they knew I was autistic. He says it's better for me to stay down here where nobody can see me." That's when Roberto cut in, voice tight and controlled. "Daniela, maybe don't repeat things you don't fully understand." But her response came without hesitation. "I do understand. You think I'm broken? You'd rather pretend I'm in Switzerland than tell people you have an autistic daughter." Her words landed like a slap. Roberto froze, clearly blindsided by her clarity. Lucía leaned forward. "Daniela, have you ever thought about what kind of life you'd want if you had the choice?" The girl's eyes lit up with a quiet, long-buried hope. "I'd like to go to a school with other kids like me. I want to learn more about art and plants. I want friends who don't think I'm weird for needing quiet or hating loud sounds." "You know," Lucía said, "there are schools made exactly for that, places where your way of thinking is appreciated." Daniela sat taller, stunned. "Really? Places where I wouldn't be strange?" "Exactly," Lucía said, her voice warm. Carmen rushed forward and pulled her daughter into a fierce embrace. "I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry I didn't protect you. I was so foggy from those pills, but that's no excuse." Daniela rested her head on her mother's shoulder. "It's okay, Mom. Max always told me when you were drugged and when you weren't." Roberto stepped forward, face flushed and movements jerky, clearly realizing he was losing control of the narrative. "That's enough. This has gone far enough." But Lucía had already gathered everything she needed. Daniela had clearly stated her wishes. She understood her situation, and she had described systemic emotional abuse. "Mr. Aguirre," Lucía said, her tone shifting into firm professionalism, I'm obligated to report that Daniela is fully capable of making informed decisions about her care. Roberto bristled. You're way out of line, doctor. On the contrary, I'm fulfilling my ethical duty. Daniela is being kept in a state that qualifies as abuse. Just then, Max stepped between Roberto and the others, his stance alert, trained, protective. Lucía recognized it immediately, a response ingrained during crisis training. Dad, Daniela said, voice calm despite the crackling tension. I want to leave. I want to live somewhere I can learn and grow. I'm not trying to hurt you, but I can't keep living in this basement. You don't understand the real world, Roberto snapped. You're safe here, you're cared for. No, I'm not, I'm a prisoner. And Mom's being drugged so she won't stop you. That's not protection, that's control. Her quiet strength shattered any illusion Roberto still clung to about shielding her for her own good. Carmen stood, shoulders squared. Roberto, this ends today. Daniela's leaving this basement. She's going to get an education, and I'm done taking those pills you've been pushing on me. You don't know what you're saying, he said, desperation rising in his voice. If Daniela goes out there, if anyone finds out, I don't care, Carmen shouted, her voice full of the fight that had been buried for years. She's my daughter, and I've been a coward for too long. Roberto lunged toward the staircase, planting himself in front of the door like a barricade. Nobody's leaving until we figure out what's happening next. The threat hung heavy in the air. Lucía, already prepared for this moment, discreetly activated a panic app on her phone, preset to ping her colleague Elena Marquez with her location and a distress alert, if not canceled within 2 hours. Mr. Aguirre, she said evenly, I've already informed legal and social service contacts about this situation. If I'm harmed or if Daniela is not released willingly, there will be immediate consequences. It wasn't entirely true, but he couldn't know that. Are you threatening me? He asked. I'm stating the legal facts. Daniela's a minor being held against her will. She has voiced her desire to leave. Continuing to keep her here qualifies as unlawful detainment and abuse. Max moved closer to Daniela and Carmen, pressing against them with quiet force, forming a physical wall between them and Roberto. Dad, Daniela said softly, you can either be the dad who helps me grow, or the one who keeps me trapped. But you can't pretend anymore that this is for my own good. Her words hit harder than any accusation. Roberto's posture collapsed. He sank into the nearest chair, burying his face in his hands. I don't know how to explain to the world that I have a daughter like you, he murmured. My reputation, my business, it's all built on an image. Daniela walked toward him, gently placing her hand on the table. Then let them see the truth, Papa, because I'm not ashamed anymore, and you don't have to be either. Maybe I'm not the problem. Maybe the real issue is that you think you have to be perfect. That afternoon, as Daniela climbed the basement stairs for the final time, not as a prisoner, but as someone stepping into freedom, she carried more than just a few belongings. She held the fragile but powerful hope of a life that had waited 2 long years to begin. Max followed close behind, no longer anxious or frantic, but calm, almost proud, like a dog who knew deep in his bones that his mission had been fulfilled. Daniela was free at last. But Lucía understood that this was just the beginning. The real challenges were still ahead. The days after that basement confrontation became a blur of transition, messy, emotional, and full of legal red tape. Lucía found herself pulled into a whirlwind of doctors, lawyers, and specialists, all working together to figure out what came next. That same afternoon, Elena Marquez arrived at the Aguirre residence with a social worker trained in autism cases and a police officer specializing in child abuse. Roberto had agreed to cooperate, though his private attorney stood nearby, giving the whole scene a tense, brittle energy, polite but charged. "Mr. Aguirre," Elena began, her voice firm but not unkind, shaped by years of handling situations just like this one. "We need to establish a few basic facts. Has Daniela been living in your basement for the past 2 years?" Roberto avoided looking at his daughter. "Yes," he said quietly. "During that time, has she received any formal education?" "No." "Has she had regular contact with people outside your immediate family?" "Not really. And when she did express a desire to live elsewhere..." Roberto glanced at his lawyer before answering. "We believed she wasn't capable of making that kind of decision with full understanding." Elena then turned her attention to Daniela, who was seated between Carmen and Lucía on the living room couch. "Daniela," she asked gently, "do you understand that, as a minor, you have legal rights? That includes the right to education, to social interaction, and to live in an environment that supports your growth." "Yes," Daniela answered clearly, her voice steady in a way that had impressed Lucía from their first meeting. "Do you understand what it might mean if you choose to live somewhere other than your parents' home?" "Yes. It means I'll have to learn to be more independent. I'll need to get used to new routines, and I know it won't always be easy. But it also means I'll go to school, make friends, and grow as an artist." The social worker, Sandra Vega, a woman with over 15 years of experience working with neurodivergent youth, had been quietly observing the entire exchange. "Daniela," she said softly, "how would you feel about living in a specialized residential center with other young people on the autism spectrum?" Daniela's eyes lit up, a flicker of hope finally escaping after years of suppression. "You mean I could meet others like me? People who understand why some sounds hurt, or why I need quiet time to think?" "Exactly," Sandra said. "In fact, there's a center I know of. Some of the residents are artists, and their work's even been displayed in local galleries." Carmen, who had been weeping quietly for most of the conversation, finally found her voice. Would I be able to visit her? Could we still see each other?" "Of course, Mrs. Aguirre," Elena replied. "We're not trying to cut families apart. The goal is to build an environment where Daniela can thrive. If maintaining contact with you helps her do that, then we'll encourage it and make it happen." Roberto finally lifted his head. His face was worn, as if the weight of everything had finally sunk in, defeat mixed with something close to relief. What happens next? Legally speaking?" "Mr. Aguirre," Elena replied, "we have 2 paths forward. We can pursue criminal charges, illegal confinement, child abuse, or we can work toward a voluntary transition that prioritizes Daniela's well-being." Roberto's lawyer leaned in and whispered something in his ear. After a few long minutes of quiet conversation, Roberto nodded. "I want to do what's right for her, even if it's late." Over the next 3 days, Lucía watched Max begin to change. With Daniela preparing to move to the residential center, the dog seemed to sense that his role was shifting. He wasn't agitated, he was calm, observant, maybe even reflective. "It's strange," Lucía told Dr. Patricia Solis during a phone call. "Max knows his job is almost over, but instead of being anxious, he looks fulfilled." "Therapy dogs often have that awareness," Patricia replied. "They know when their person doesn't need protection anymore, just room to grow." "Do you think Max could be part of her transition?" "Absolutely. In fact, having him nearby during the adjustment period would be the best thing for her." On Wednesday morning, Lucía returned to the Aguirre house for what she knew would be her final visit in a professional role. Carmen had stopped over-medicating and showed a surprising new clarity. Roberto stayed distant, but he no longer fought the process. And Daniela glowed with an energy Lucía hadn't seen before. "Dr. Lucía," she said, approaching with something hidden behind her back. "I made you something before I go." She handed Lucía a drawing, one she'd worked on over the past few days. It was a portrait of Max, but not just any portrait. It showed him as a protector, a guide, almost mythic in presence. Behind him was a window, sunlight pouring in, and the silhouette of a young girl walking toward the light. "It's Max telling me it's time to go," Daniela said. "And it's you helping me understand what he's been trying to say all along." Lucía felt a tightness in her throat, eyes misting as she looked at the drawing, not just because of the skill it showed, but because of what it expressed. "Daniela, this is extraordinary," she said. "Would you ever want to share this with people in the art world? You really think my art could matter? I think your art could change how people understand autism and neurodiversity." Carmen approached, holding a small suitcase filled with Daniela's things. "Dr. Hernandez," she said, voice trembling but strong, "I'll never be able to thank you enough. If it weren't for you, she might have stayed in that basement for years." "Mrs. Aguirre, Max is the one who rescued her," Lucía replied. "I just finally listened to what he'd been trying to say." Roberto stood in the doorway, watching the final preparations with a hollow kind of stillness. With a look that was hard to read, Daniela finally spoke. "I need you to know I was wrong. I thought I was protecting you, but now I see I was hurting you." She stepped closer to her father, and to everyone's surprise wrapped him in a hug. "Dad, I just hope one day you'll be proud of having a daughter who's autistic. I hope you'll understand that being different doesn't mean being less." Her voice was steady, but the message behind it struck deep. The forgiveness and clarity in her words left Roberto stunned. For the first time since Lucía had known him, she saw real tears, raw, unfiltered tears gather in his eyes. Max had been quietly watching the entire farewell from his usual post by the door, like a soldier seeing a long mission come to its end. When it was time to leave, the dog walked right up to Daniela, naturally falling into step beside her, just as he'd done night after night in that basement. "Max, is he coming with me?" Daniela asked, her voice holding a flicker of hope. "Yes," Lucía replied. "Max will go with you, to help you transition. And later, when you're fully settled in your new home, he can come back to help others who need him." As they exited the Aguirre residence for the last time, Lucía stood back, watching Daniela walk toward the waiting car that would take her to her new beginning. She didn't move like someone fleeing her past. She moved like someone finally stepping into the life she was meant for. Max trotted beside her, not with the urgent desperation he had shown for weeks, but with the quiet satisfaction of a dog who had done exactly what he was trained to do. For the first time in months, Lucía felt it in her bones. She and Max had helped unlock something far beyond the realm of medicine. They had helped free a soul that had always deserved to shine. 6 months after Daniela's departure, Lucía found herself at a small art gallery in Roma Norte. She stood quietly, taking in an exhibit she never could have imagined back in those tense days at the Lomas estate. The show was called Neurodivergent Perspectives, Art from Another Dimension, and hanging at the heart of the main room was a series of paintings Daniela had created during her first months at the Centro de Desarrollo Integral Patricia Solis. "It's amazing, isn't it?" came a voice from behind her. Lucía turned to see Carmen Aguirre approaching, dressed in bright, joyful colors, a far cry from the dull grays and oversized sweaters she wore during her heavily medicated days. Her eyes sparkled with a clarity Lucía hadn't seen since their very first meeting. "Carmen, you look radiant. How's the recovery process been? Hard, Carmen said honestly, eyes settling on one of Daniela's pieces, a surreal garden viewed from shifting angles. But freeing, coming off the meds was hell. I realized how much I'd lost. All those little moments with Daniela, gone. But I also realized I still have a chance to be the mother I should have been all along. In the months since Daniela left, Carmen had committed to individual therapy and joined support groups for parents of neurodivergent kids. Her transformation wasn't just mental, it was foundational. She was learning, finally, how to love her daughter on her daughter's terms. How's Daniela adjusting to the center? Lucía asked gently. Carmen's eyes welled with tears, but this time they were tears of pure joy. You wouldn't believe it, Lucía. It's like she was asleep for years and now she's fully awake. She has real friends, people who actually understand how she sees the world. She's taking advanced art, botany, and even learning sign language to help her communicate when she gets overwhelmed. At that moment, Daniela appeared from across the gallery, flanked by two other teens who clearly shared her world. At 17, she carried herself with a presence that radiated quiet confidence. Her hair was adorned with tiny pressed flowers she'd preserved herself, and her dress was one she had designed, inspired by the geometric shapes she saw in nature. "Dr. Lucía," Daniela exclaimed, her whole face lighting up. "I can't believe you came to my show. Daniela, I wouldn't miss it for the world. Your paintings are breathtaking." Roberto's lawyer leaned in and whispered something in his ear. After a few long minutes of quiet conversation, Roberto nodded. "I want to do what's right for her, even if it's late." Over the next 3 days, Lucía watched Max begin to change. With Daniela preparing to move to the residential center, the dog seemed to sense that his role was shifting. He wasn't agitated, he was calm, observant, maybe even reflective. "It's strange," Lucía told Dr. Patricia Solis during a phone call. "Max knows his job is almost over, but instead of being anxious, he looks fulfilled." "Therapy dogs often have that awareness," Patricia replied. "They know when their person doesn't need protection anymore, just room to grow." "Do you think Max could be part of her transition?" "Absolutely. In fact, having him nearby during the adjustment period would be the best thing for her." On Wednesday morning, Lucía returned to the Aguirre house for what she knew would be her final visit in a professional role. Carmen had stopped over-medicating and showed a surprising new clarity. Roberto stayed distant, but he no longer fought the process. And Daniela glowed with an energy Lucía hadn't seen before. "Dr. Lucía," she said, approaching with something hidden behind her back. "I made you something before I go." She handed Lucía a drawing, one she'd worked on over the past few days. It was a portrait of Max, but not just any portrait. It showed him as a protector, a guide, almost mythic in presence. Behind him was a window, sunlight pouring in, and the silhouette of a young girl walking toward the light. "It's Max telling me it's time to go," Daniela said. "And it's you helping me understand what he's been trying to say all along." Lucía felt a tightness in her throat, eyes misting as she looked at the drawing, not just because of the skill it showed, but because of what it expressed. "Daniela, this is extraordinary," she said. "Would you ever want to share this with people in the art world? You really think my art could matter? I think your art could change how people understand autism and neurodiversity." Carmen approached, holding a small suitcase filled with Daniela's things. "Dr. Hernandez," she said, voice trembling but strong, "I'll never be able to thank you enough. If it weren't for you, she might have stayed in that basement for years." "Mrs. Aguirre, Max is the one who rescued her," Lucía replied. "I just finally listened to what he'd been trying to say." Roberto stood in the doorway, watching the final preparations with a hollow kind of stillness. With a look that was hard to read, Daniela finally spoke. "I need you to know I was wrong. I thought I was protecting you, but now I see I was hurting you." She stepped closer to her father, and to everyone's surprise wrapped him in a hug. "Dad, I just hope one day you'll be proud of having a daughter who's autistic. I hope you'll understand that being different doesn't mean being less." Her voice was steady, but the message behind it struck deep. The forgiveness and clarity in her words left Roberto stunned. For the first time since Lucía had known him, she saw real tears, raw, unfiltered tears gather in his eyes. Max had been quietly watching the entire farewell from his usual post by the door, like a soldier seeing a long mission come to its end. When it was time to leave, the dog walked right up to Daniela, naturally falling into step beside her, just as he'd done night after night in that basement. "Max, is he coming with me?" Daniela asked, her voice holding a flicker of hope. "Yes," Lucía replied. "Max will go with you, to help you transition. And later, when you're fully settled in your new home, he can come back to help others who need him." As they exited the Aguirre residence for the last time, Lucía stood back, watching Daniela walk toward the waiting car that would take her to her new beginning. She didn't move like someone fleeing her past. She moved like someone finally stepping into the life she was meant for. Max trotted beside her, not with the urgent desperation he had shown for weeks, but with the quiet satisfaction of a dog who had done exactly what he was trained to do. For the first time in months, Lucía felt it in her bones. She and Max had helped unlock something far beyond the realm of medicine. They had helped free a soul that had always deserved to shine. 6 months after Daniela's departure, Lucía found herself at a small art gallery in Roma Norte. She stood quietly, taking in an exhibit she never could have imagined back in those tense days at the Lomas estate. The show was called Neurodivergent Perspectives, Art from Another Dimension, and hanging at the heart of the main room was a series of paintings Daniela had created during her first months at the Centro de Desarrollo Integral Patricia Solis. "It's amazing, isn't it?" came a voice from behind her. Lucía turned to see Carmen Aguirre approaching, dressed in bright, joyful colors, a far cry from the dull grays and oversized sweaters she wore during her heavily medicated days. Her eyes sparkled with a clarity Lucía hadn't seen since their very first meeting. "Carmen, you look radiant. How's the recovery process been?" "Hard," Carmen said honestly, eyes settling on one of Daniela's pieces, a surreal garden viewed from shifting angles. "But freeing. Coming off the meds was hell. I realized how much I'd lost. All those little moments with Daniela, gone. But I also realized I still have a chance to be the mother I should have been all along." In the months since Daniela left, Carmen had committed to individual therapy and joined support groups for parents of neurodivergent kids. Her transformation wasn't just mental, it was foundational. She was learning, finally, how to love her daughter on her daughter's terms. "How's Daniela adjusting to the center?" Lucía asked gently. Carmen's eyes welled with tears, but this time they were tears of pure joy. "You wouldn't believe it, Lucía. It's like she was asleep for years and now she's fully awake. She has real friends, people who actually understand how she sees the world. She's taking advanced art, botany, and even learning sign language to help her communicate when she gets overwhelmed." At that moment, Daniela appeared from across the gallery, flanked by 2 other teens who clearly shared her world. At 17, she carried herself with a presence that radiated quiet confidence. Her hair was adorned with tiny pressed flowers she'd preserved herself, and her dress was one she had designed inspired by the geometric shapes she saw in nature. "Dr. Lucía," Daniela exclaimed, her whole face lighting up. "I can't believe you came to my show. Daniela, I wouldn't miss it for the world. Your paintings are breathtaking." "Thank you," she said, then added with a thoughtful smile. "You know what's wild? Everyone sees something different in them. My art teacher says that means I'm showing universal truths through my own lens." One of her friends, a shy boy named Miguel with Asperger's, stepped forward. "Are you the vet who rescued Daniela? And Max too?" "Well," Lucía said, glancing toward the door, "I think Max did the rescuing. I just learned to listen." "Is Max here?" Daniela asked, eyes scanning the room. "He's outside with Roberto," Carmen replied softly. The mention of her father brought a subtle shift in the air. Not fear like before, but the natural tension of a relationship slowly rebuilding. "Dad came?" Daniela asked, her voice cautiously hopeful. "Yes, mija. He's been working on himself too." Roberto had spent the past few months in therapy, confronting the deep-rooted insecurities that had led him to isolate his daughter. He'd also started working with organizations that promoted neurodiversity inclusion in the business world. Outside the gallery, they found him seated on a park bench, Max resting peacefully at his feet. The dog looked nothing like the anxious, high-strung animal Lucía had first met. His coat gleamed, his eyes were calm, and his body language radiated a sense of belonging, like he had finally found his place in the world. "Dad," Daniela said, approaching with cautious but steady steps. Roberto stood immediately, his eyes red from crying. "Daniela, your paintings, they're incredible. I had no idea you had that kind of talent." "I've always had it, Dad," she replied, gentle but firm. "I just never had the space to grow it." The way she said it, honest, not bitter, showed just how far she'd come. She had learned to speak hard truths without cruelty, something most adults never master. Roberto nodded slowly, accepting what her words implied. "You're right. I'm trying to understand you better, and myself too." Max stepped up to Daniela, and she immediately knelt to hug him. The dog greeted her with the quiet joy of an old friend, and for a moment, Lucía stood still, watching. This wasn't just a happy ending. It was a beginning. A messy, imperfect, deeply human beginning, built on truth, healing, and the quiet power of being fully seen. ChatGPT Janoi. He noticed it right away. Something had changed in Max. Gone was the frantic energy of a therapy dog in distress. In its place was a calm, almost knowing affection. It was the gentle ease of a companion who understood he had fulfilled his mission. "So, how's Max adjusting to his new life?" Lucía asked Roberto. "Honestly, better than we expected. He still spends time with me at home, but he also comes to the center twice a week. Helps with the kids. Dr. Solis says he has this uncanny gift for sensing which ones are struggling the most." "He found his calling," Daniela said, scratching behind Max's ears as he rested beside her. "He didn't just save me. It's like he realized his job wasn't over, it had only begun. Now he helps kids like me settle in. He knows who needs him." Just then, Dr. Patricia Solis emerged from the gallery building, walking alongside several parents and a local journalist documenting the center's new initiatives. "Lucía, I'm so glad you're here," Patricia said warmly. "I wanted you to know that Daniela's case has driven real changes in how we approach similar situations. We've created a specific therapy dog protocol for working with socially isolated neurodivergent teens." "For real?" Lucía asked, eyebrows raised. "Absolutely. Max is now our lead canine consultant. His ability to pick up on emotional distress in autistic youth It's almost supernatural, Patricia replied. At that moment, Miguel, Daniela's friend, approached Max shyly. The dog lifted his head and focused on the boy with the same precise attentiveness Lucía remembered from the early days. Miguel's had a tough time adjusting to changes in his routine, Patricia explained. Max picked up on his stress before any of us saw it. Watching them, Lucía realized how far Max had come, from a dog desperate to communicate one urgent truth to a seasoned partner who now applied his intuition to help others heal. Daniela, Lucía asked softly, what are your plans now? The girl's eyes lit up with a vision that felt bigger than the room. I want to study therapeutic arts. I want to help other neurodivergent teens express what they've been through painting, through sculpture, anything. And I want to work with Max to design programs for kids like us. Carmen stepped in quietly and wrapped an arm around her daughter, something warm and protective that had been missing for far too long. The university's already interested, Carmen said with a proud smile. She's been offered spots in programs that specialize in what she does. Roberto, who had been listening silently, finally spoke. Daniela, I want you to know how proud I am of you, and I need to say something out loud. I'm sorry. For all the years I didn't see your worth. Dad, Daniela replied, her voice calm but strong. What matters isn't what we lost back then. It's what we choose to do with the time we've got now. As the sun dipped behind the skyline of Mexico City, the group slowly began to part ways. Daniela returned to the center with her peers. Carmen headed to her new place. She and Roberto had agreed on a temporary separation while they each worked through their own healing. And Roberto? He took Max back to Las Lomas, where the dog now had his own dedicated space and free run of the property. Dr. Lucía, Daniela said as she turned to leave, thank you for hearing what Max was trying to say, for not giving up when every other adult stopped seeing me. That night, as Lucía drove home through the glowing city, she thought about how this had all started, with what was supposed to be a routine behavioral case. But it had become something much deeper, a story of emotional liberation, of broken bonds repaired, and of quiet bravery. Max had fulfilled his role, yes, but he had evolved beyond it. Daniela had reclaimed not only her freedom, but also a purpose. Carmen had rediscovered herself, as a mother, yes, but also as a woman with agency. Even Roberto had begun the long climb toward becoming the kind of father he always should have been. And Lucía? She found something she hadn't even known. She was searching for a way to honor her own daughter's memory by helping another girl rise into her potential. The story wasn't over, but the foundations had been laid, solid, hopeful, and Max had taught them all the same lesson. Sometimes the most important voices are the ones that take the most effort to hear. 2 years after Daniela's rescue, the tale that began with the frantic barks of a German shepherd had grown into something far greater, a national movement that was reshaping how Mexico viewed neurodivergence and the vital role of therapy animals in identifying silent suffering. That afternoon, Lucía stood backstage at the main auditorium of UNAM, preparing to deliver her keynote, The Heart's Instinct, How Therapy Dogs Are Changing Child Protection. In the front row sat Daniela, now 19, halfway through her degree in therapeutic arts. Max sat beside her, officially certified as the first university therapy dog in Mexico. Good morning, Lucía began, addressing a packed house of social workers, psychologists, special educators, veterinarians, and government leaders. 2 years ago, I got a call about a dog with behavioral problems. Today, I want to tell you how that call became a turning point, how it taught us to listen to voices that don't always speak in languages we expect. Over the next hour, She recounted the full story, from Max's early signs of distress to Daniela's transformation into an artist and advocate. But this wasn't just a testimony. It was backed by data. In the past 2 years, Lucía explained, we've used the protocol inspired by this case to identify and rescue 14 neurodivergent minors who were being kept in social isolation by their families. And in every case, it was a therapy dog that raised the first red flag. The program born from Daniela's story had a name now, Protocolo Max, and it was just getting started. Therapy dogs had already been adopted by child welfare institutions in 6 Mexican states. These specially trained animals could pick up on chronic stress, social withdrawal, and signs of isolation in developmentally disabled children. After the keynote lecture, Lucía met Daniela in the university garden. The girl had grown, not just taller but in presence. Her mix of artistic sensitivity and fierce activism was impossible to ignore. "Dr. Lucía, did you see?" Reporters came. From 3 different countries, Daniela beamed. They want to cover how the Max protocol is going global. How do you feel about all the media attention? She stroked Max's fur as she waited for a reply. Lucía thought for a moment. At first, it overwhelmed me. But then I realized, every time we share this story, there's a chance some child locked away in a basement somewhere gets seen. That makes every spotlight worth it. In the past 2 years, Daniela had become an internationally recognized voice for neurodivergent rights. Her artwork had been displayed in galleries from New York to Tokyo. But more importantly to her, she had helped build therapeutic art programs in a dozen specialized centers across Mexico. "And how are things with your parents now?" Lucía asked, gently. Daniela gave a soft smile. "It's complicated, but good. My mom and we're really close now. Carmen, once frozen by guilt, was now a fierce advocate for other parents in similar situations. She'd even written a book, Awakening from the Medication, A Mother Finds Her Daughter and Herself. It had become essential reading in social, work and family psychology courses. "And your dad?" Lucía asked. Daniela hesitated, then replied with honesty that had become her trademark. "He's different now. He's been in therapy for 2 years. And I think, for the first time, he's starting to get it. That being neurodivergent isn't something shameful." Roberto Aguirre, once emotionally distant, had shocked everyone by becoming a national example of inclusive employment. His construction company now employed over 50 neurodiverse individuals, complete with adaptive workspaces that other businesses had begun to replicate. Daniela's eyes lit up. "But you know what's the best part, Dr. Lucía?" Lucía smiled. "What's that?" "Max finally has a family that understands him. At college, he helps other neurodivergent students. With my dad, he teaches patience and empathy. And when he visits Mom's center, he helps parents learn how to really communicate with their kids." As if on cue, Max lifted his head and looked at Daniela, those soulful eyes reflecting the same purpose that once saved her life. Just then, Lucia's phone buzzed. It was Patricia Solis from the center. "Lucía, we've got a situation." A call came in from Guadalajara. "A collie trained for therapy is acting out, just like Max did back then. The local authorities are asking for your insight." Lucía met Daniela's gaze. She'd heard the entire exchange. "Another Max?" she asked quietly. "Looks like it," Lucía replied. "Can we come with you?" Daniela asked. "Max and we know how to listen now, especially when a dog's trying to tell us something's wrong." Daniela's offer wasn't impulsive. It was the culmination of her journey from victim to active ally. "Are you sure you're ready for that, emotionally?" Lucía asked. Daniela nodded firmly. "I am. And I know Max is too. Right, buddy? Max stood immediately, posture sharp, eyes focused. Lucía had seen that look before. It meant he was ready to work. 3 days later, they were in Guadalajara, meeting with local authorities about a case that carried eerie echoes of the Aguirre situation. A therapy collie named Luna had been exhibiting signs of extreme anxiety around a particular home. The odd part? The house was registered to a family of 4, but none of the neighbors had ever seen a child. "She's doing the same thing Max did," Daniela observed, eyes fixed on Luna as she circled a window restlessly. "She's trying to tell someone there's something we're not seeing." Thanks to everything they'd learned before, the investigation was fast and focused. Within a week they had uncovered a hidden room. Inside they found a 12-year-old boy with Down syndrome who had been kept out of sight by his grandparents for 3 long years. As they flew home to Mexico City, Daniela turned to Lucía. "You know what's wild?" she said. "What?" Lucía replied. "Max didn't just save me. He taught me how to save others. And now Luna's going to do the same for that boy." Lucía glanced at Max, who was asleep at Daniela's feet, peaceful and serene. She realized that this dog had grown into something far more than a rescue animal. He was now a teacher, for both humans and fellow dogs, a quiet symbol of hope. 6 months later, the Max protocol had been formally adopted by Mexico's Secretary of Health as standard practice in protecting developmentally disabled children. Lucía launched a dedicated training center where therapy dogs were specifically taught to detect signs of abuse, neglect, and social isolation. Meanwhile, Daniela began her senior thesis, a groundbreaking study on therapeutic art and interspecies communication. Carmen opened a resource center for parents of neurodiverse youth. Max worked there twice a week, helping families build stronger bonds. Roberto, transformed by his daughter's journey, now spoke regularly at business conferences on workplace inclusion, but perhaps the most beautiful shift was Max himself. No longer the anxious dog desperate to be understood, he had become something bigger, a seasoned professional, a mentor, a fully integrated member of a family that had finally learned to listen. One chilly December afternoon, exactly 2 years after Daniela's rescue, Lucía sat at her desk sorting case files when a letter arrived that caught her breath. It was from a veterinarian in Spain. She'd adapted the Max protocol to detect isolation in elderly dementia patients. "Dear Dr. Hernandez," the letter read, "I wanted to tell you that the work you developed in Mexico has now inspired programs all across Europe. We've rescued 17 elderly individuals who were being held in isolation by their families. Every case flagged first by therapy dogs trained under your model." That night, Lucía sat quietly in her apartment, staring at the framed photo of her late daughter Isabella. She whispered, like she'd done 100 times before, "Mi amor, I think I finally found a way to honor your memory. Every child we rescue, every voice we help uncover, every family we teach to love without fear, it's all a little piece of you." For the first time in years, the pain of losing Isabella softened into something purposeful, something beautiful. Her daughter had only lived 8 months, but her memory had sparked a movement that was changing lives around the globe. What began with one German shepherd's urgent bark had turned into a legacy of healing, empathy, and the power of listening to voices that don't use words. Max had taught everyone involved the greatest lesson of all. When instinct is paired with compassion and relentless love, there is no cage that cannot be broken, no soul that cannot be freed. If this story moved you, give us a like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. And if you made it this far, comment, "I made it here," and tell us what part touched you most. Oh, and don't miss the next story coming up on screen. It's absolutely unforgettable.